All right, there we go. All right, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Julie Mazzolini, and as Dave mentioned, we're going to go through how to, what happens when you get your bees, and two different ways. One is with packages, which Dave is going to go through, and another one is with nucs, which I'm going to go through. And then we'll also talk about feeding. So a lot of you are getting nucs this year. This is a nuc. You can see what a nuc is. A nuc is a fully formed hive. So in the nuc, you will get, it contains everything that you need. It'll contain a laying queen. It'll contain comb. It'll contain the food that is needed. Normally, these bees have been together for about a week or so. They're probably the queen's brood that's in here. So it's a full hive. That's what nuc stands for, is nucleus. So everything that you need is in here. They've probably been living in this box for a few days, which is perfectly fine, which is great. When you order a nuc, you want to make sure you know what it is that you're ordering. Some nucs come in 4-frames, at 4-frame nucs. Some come in 5-frame nucs. Some come with a 2019 queen. Some come with a current year's queen, like a 2020 queen. You also want to know what kind of queen that you're getting. So what are the type of bees that you've ordered? All of this, what is it that you've actually ordered, and what you should expect when you get your nuc. So some sellers will allow you to open up your nuc right there on the spot. I'm not sure how things are going to be now with COVID-19. For the most part, I would expect that you probably just pick up your nuc and bring it home. When you bring your nuc home, weather permitting, if you can, I suggest opening it up, taking a look to make sure that you actually are getting what you expect to get, what you paid for. Because this is a fully functioning hive and they have some food in here, if the weather does not permit you to dig in here right away and you're a little bit nervous about opening up the hive, it's perfectly fine for you to take your nuc and set it on top of your hive and open them up. So when you have a nuc box, the nuc box the bees are in here, obviously they're all closed in. What you want to do when you get your nuc, and if you can't open them up right away, is open up the hatch, this door here. I don't know if hopefully you can see that. That'll give the bees a chance to come out and start to get to know the area a little bit better. You don't want to leave your bees closed up in there. You're going to have to release them and let them out. So you've got your nuc. Make sure that you have everything available right then and there before you even start. So you get your nuc, set it down, get your smoker lit so that you have a smoker available in case you need it. Then you have your hive tool as well, so that you're ready. Open up the top of your hive. Take the top off. You're going to take your inner cover off. And you're going to take out the 5. So I don't have 10 frames in here. This is my 10 frame deep. But you're going to take out your, so this is a 5-frame nuc. You're going to take out 5 frames right out of the middle. So you've got all 5 frames out. And set them aside. So now I've got space to put my 5 frames in here. And I've got my nuc, all right? So I'm going to open my nuc. And I usually like to set my nuc right beside my hives because we're going to put the frames in exactly the same order that they came out of the nuc box into the hive. So what I would do first is I would gently pull out the first frame like this, and I'm going to take a look to see what I have there. I'm looking for what's actually here. On the outside frame, it could be nectar and pollen, or honey and pollen. You could see the queen on this hive. You could see brood on this hive. So I'm looking closely to see what I have on here and making sure that I'm happy with it, with what I'm seeing. And then I'm going to put it in the hive in the exact same order. I'm going to be doing the same with absolutely every frame that I'm getting here. And not to mention also, if you feel you need to give them a little puff of smoke, you can give them a little puff of smoke, but I wouldn't go wild with it, all right? So I'm going to look at each one. Same order that they came out of the nuke box. I'm doing that for absolutely every single frame, looking at it and putting it in the exact same order. In the box. If these bees are really active, it might not be full of bees and brood, easier to install. And then slide in your last frame. So now that's it. Easy to put in a loop. And
Julie?
Yeah.
Got a question is, when you're looking at the frames, what are you looking for?
I'm looking to see, I'm looking at the bees. I'm looking at how many bees I have. I'm looking for food. So I'm looking for nectar and pollen. I'm looking to see if I see the queen, and I'm looking for brood and eggs and larvae. So I'm just taking a stock of what it is I have in this box. And I'm always looking for the queen. I always look for the queen. You don't always have to see her, but you just need to see signs of her. So I'm installing a nuke, really, because it's a smaller hive. I like to try to find her. If the weather permits and it's not too cool, I will take the time to try to find her.
So we have another question.
Some nukes, this is another thing to find out when you order your nuke. Some nukes some suppliers will mark their queen. Sometimes that costs a little extra money to get a marked queen. For the most part, they're not marked. So.
Got another question from Sue, who asks, and I'm assuming she's going to get her bees Friday. Is it okay to get your bees on Friday and move them into their regular box on Friday?
I have to look at the weather, but I think the weather, if it's slightly raining and misting, it's not a problem. That won't hurt them one bit. So they could, if it's a little misty, a little cool, I think it's supposed to be like 55 on Friday. Shouldn't be a problem.
And so another question from Jenny is, what's the ideal temperature?
Well, if you're putting in your nuke, the faster you can put in the nuke when it's cool, the better. You don't want to chill your brood. So I wouldn't put the nuke in if it was like barely 40. 45 would also make me a little bit nervous. I would be doing it pretty darn quick. But in 50s, and then you do it really quick, you're just transferring them from the nuke box into your full hive, it shouldn't be a problem at all.
So Julie, on that, we may say if it was cold, you might not really look at the frames much. You may just quickly move them, right?
Right. I would. Just remember, temperature is really important because you don't want to chill your brood. So if it's too cool, just get them in the box. Get them in the box and wait for it to warm up, and then you can come back. Come back in about a week or more because you're going to want them to settle in. But don't take the time to look at each frame if it's too cool and you're nervous about it. It does not hurt anything at all to leave them sit until it's warm enough for you to feel comfortable.
Elizabeth's got a pretty good question here. If she chooses to mark her queen, should she do it right away or wait a few weeks for them to settle in?
I think you could do it right away. If you find her and you're able to mark her, I'd mark her right there on the spot. You're never going to find an easier time to mark your queen than right then.
And I'll add my 2 cents worth. This is Carl. Is I would wait a few weeks and then mark her, let them get all settled in, because it is a bit of trauma to the queen when you mark her. So there you got 2 opinions, Elizabeth. Do what you want.
Yeah.
Okay, this might be a silly question from Dan. How do you mark a queen?
Can I suggest we hold that for a different presentation?
Yeah, we may want to hold a class on that a little bit later because we've done that before. There's a couple different techniques, so we'll put that down as a potential class.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What's the recipe for the 5 frames that aren't with the nuke? Is there honey, comb? What do you usually put in there with the other 5 that are on the outside?
What, that's already in the box, you mean?
Yeah.
So if you have built-out comb, it's like gold. That's what you want in here. If you have comb with honey in it, even better. If you're a new beekeeper and you have no built-out comb, you've got to go with what you have. Your goal for the year is going to be getting as much built-out comb as you can, which means a lot of feeding. It takes a lot of work for the bees to build comb. So if you have built-out comb with honey in it, definitely put it in there. As long as you're sure where you got it from, and it's not, they're not adding frames that could have any kind of disease on them.
So is there more than others? Say, would you put 2 comb and 2 honey? Because I have a lot of both. So.
Well, so if you're getting 1 hive, I just put in. I would put in some empty comb for her to lay in, and then a comb of honey on the outside.
Yep, exactly.
Got another question. For a mid-May installation, what entrance reducer opening do you want, if any?
Very good question. Thank you for asking. Actually, I meant to mention that.
That was Bob that asked that question.
Okay, when before I even get started, I am putting on my entrance reducer to the lowest, I don't put it on the lowest section, maybe the mid-lowest section. The lowest section for my entrance reducer is just really small. I don't know if you can see it, it's really small. I put it in like the second. So it gives room for the bees to come out, but it still blocks the whole entrance in order so that your bees have a little protection there. It's easier for them to guard the hive.
So I've got another question. They're going to be doing all medium 10 frames. We are getting a 5-frame medium nuke. Do we still use only 1 box initially?
Yes.
Yep.
Ben, Stacy, that answer your question? Yeah, okay, sure did.
But I would say if it's just a one small medium, I would definitely look very soon to put another medium on top to make a full brood box. So 3 mediums makes 2 brood boxes. 3 mediums to 3 brood boxes. I would close them up in 1 medium, but then in about, I bet you not more than a week or 2, I would stick another medium right on top.
Because you want to wait like a week before you check after installing a nuke, correct?
Yeah, you kind of want them to settle in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Julie.
And you're going to need to feed them. So the other thing I wanted to make sure and mention is that this isn't really the last step. We need to get food on these bees, especially if there's no other food in here except that came with the frames. And let me just kind of back up 1 more second. The frames that you're getting with your nuke came from a supplier, and those frames are probably old. So these frames that are now in the center of your box, you're going to want to move out fairly soon. So these will be the first frames that you get rid of over the next few years, or in the next year. I'd get them out of the hive. You don't know where they came from. You really don't know how old they are.
Hey, Julie. Julie, can you give any tips to the group about how to not roll their bees when they're trying to install the 5 frames in the box?
Yep. So I think I mentioned that I would take out the 5 center frames, but actually I would probably take out more than that. take out, say, 6 or 7, because you want to add your frames. You want to pull them away from the frame and then pull them straight out, so that you're not trying to force frames that are too close to each other, because you can roll your bees. And if you can roll your bees, you can roll your queen, and that's it's not a good thing.
So you put the
once you've got all of these in here, you can just slide in your other frames right next to them and then set them in gently. The point is to be as gentle as you can with when you put your bees in your box.
Got 2 more questions here. I've seen the entrance with the opening down, entrance reducer with the opening down, or seen it facing up. Which way is best?
I do it with the entrance down. I always have my entrance down. I know in the winter some people put their entrance up. I always have my entrance down. But yeah, you'd want your entrance to be down in the summer.
We do down in the summer. We generally recommend some people say entrance reducer with the opening up in the winter, so that bees don't have to climb over as many dead bees to get in and out.
Right. I never do that though. I just make sure that my entrance is always open. But I know some people do that. Everybody's got a different technique.
Yep.
And then Dale's got a question. He's using a deep box. When should I add a second deep box?
Let's cover that in our June education. We're thinking that'll be covered then. Well, you know what, Julie, go for it. We can answer it here. We got a little time.
I would add a second deep box when you see that your bees in here are starting to really fill out. So she's going to be laying quite quickly. And once you see, 7 to 8 frames of bees, I would add another box on top for sure.
Yep, that's 7 to 8 is what I read too.
Yep. So you just, and we're going to go through hive checks in another meeting, but when you go in and you check your hives, you can see that you're going to start to need an extra deep. For mediums, I would get that on fairly soon, because she's going to want to go up there and start to lay, or they're going to need to build that comb out if you don't have built out comb. So let the medium set when you first get your frame. When you first get your medium nuke, let it sit for about a week, and then add your other medium right on top. Okay, so we've got our bees in the box. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to need to feed. So we can put our inner cover back on, and I feed bees 1 sugar water, and I feed 2 ways. One is I put them in a big jar, and I can feed that way. And the other way is I use a bucket. I use a bucket. This is a gallon bucket, and it's got a screen on top. You can see the screen, and it's heat fixed to the back. And so I will fill this with 1 sugar water, and this is really great if you feel you can't get to your bees as quickly as you'd like, because it'll last a little bit longer. And I'll snap the top on, so this would be full of sugar water. And I would come to the back of the hive or the side of the hive. Let the sugar water run out. Right now, vacuum is being created inside this bucket. Let the sugar run out until the vacuum takes hold, and then place that right over the hole in my inner cover. I've now got food on my bees. Take another deep, or if I'm running mediums, I take mediums. I don't have mediums here, so I'm going to put mediums on. Cover the bucket up. Cover on, and I'm set. Now I'll leave them go for about a week. Let them kind of settle in, and then I can get back in there if I need to. That's all I have. If anybody has any more questions, or if I'm missing anything, Dave, any other thoughts?
How big of a weight do you put on top of your top cover so that the wind doesn't blow it over?
I put a rock on top. I just put a rock on top.
Yeah, we do a rock as well. A couple of years ago, we had 50-mile winds, and there was an awful lot of people in the club had their hives blow over. So if you know there's a big storm, make sure you got a big weight on top. Some
Yeah.
people strap theirs down. We don't strap ours, but some people do strap their hives.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways that you can keep your hive from turning over. And straps, I think, are one good way too, but you have to unstrap the whole thing every time. I find a wrap is easy. You just pull the wrap right off.
Got 4 questions for you, Julie. No need for a pollen patty or anything at this point, correct?
You know what? I wouldn't put a pollen patty on right now. I would just give them sugar water and let them go with it.
Okay.
At this stage, right now, they're starting to bring in a lot of pollen. So,
Yep.
you know, unless you feel that the bees need that protein and they're not bringing in a lot of pollen, if you feel they need it, it wouldn't hurt to put one on. But what I'm seeing in the hives right now, bees are bringing in a lot of pollen, and I'm pretty comfortable with what they're bringing in.
And next question, how long will the food last?
Well, that depends on your bees. They could, and how easy they can get out and start to collect nectar once nectar starts to come in. But I mean, a bucket like this, depending on the bees, this could last about a week, right here. But I would come out and check it to see how well they're doing. I would check it in about 3 days for sure. If you let this go down, if you let them drink this dry, they will fill the screen with propolis. So you definitely don't want to let it go dry.
What type of screen do you use on that feeder? And then along the same lines, did you make the bucket feeder?
No, I did not make the bucket feeder. It was given to me, but I can tell you where you can get them. Go to Capital B. They sell these buckets. He heat sets the screens in, and I don't know how much they are, but they're not all that expensive. So that's what I would do if I didn't already have buckets. I would go to Capital B Supply.
And another question is, what you've just shown is an internal feeder, and they want to know the difference between the internal feeder and a Boardman feeder, and do you have a preference?
I'm not familiar. What's a Foreman feeder? Is that the inside feeder?
No, Boardman, B-O-A-R-D-M-A-N.
I don't know Boardman feeder.
I think, is that an inside frame feeder, which I know I don't use them either. We had one once. I either gave it away or I threw it away.
Yeah, I mean,
But
Evie, you asked the question, do you know what a Boardman is, or can you describe it? You'd have to unmute yourself. And when do you stop, while she's doing that, when do you stop feeding?
well, definitely before you put your honey supers on. You can overfeed. Bees are going to just take it down. If they need it, they're going to take it down. I would stop feeding. I can answer that in 2 ways. If you have all empty frames, you don't have any built-out comb, you're going to want to feed the heck out of them, because it takes a lot of energy for those bees to build comb. So I would leave it on for much longer than if I had all built out comb and they were taking it in, because then I can get my honey supers on top. So you just have to watch and see what's happening there. Soon, hopefully, we'll start to get a nectar flow, and then I would probably pull the feeding back. If you put honey supers on at all, you don't want to feed, obviously.
So they generally say you leave it on until the bees stop taking it, but we had a club member that left it on through August, and then her bees swarmed. So
yeah,
that obviously was too long.
They'll start to. I mean, you don't need to keep feeding them like that when there's nectar flowing. So, it just depends on where you are in your beekeeping journey and what's happening inside your hive. You just have to kind of keep an eye on it, and you'll as you become better at beekeeping, you'll be able to recognize when it's time to take the feed off. Just simply by looking at the brood, by checking what's going on inside the hive, inside the cells.
Another question, can I just set the feeder bucket right on top of the frames and not use an inner cover?
I think you're gonna wanna have some bee space in there so that the bees can go up through the hole. I've never done it that way. I don't know why you couldn't. I don't know why you would.
They might start filling it up with burr comb, right?
Huh.
Do you think they'd start filling it up with burr comb all around?
Oh, probably, yeah. Yeah, good point.
And
They're gonna propolis the thing to death. Probably stick it right to the frames.
another question, do you use a queen excluder below the inner cover?
No. The queen's not gonna come up through the inner cover. She's gonna be
Yeah.
down inside the brood nest. The queen's never gonna come up here.
I think it's time to switch over to Dave.
All right. Okay, so we're going to talk about installing a package. So one thing that Julie and I both, we didn't really talk about, but we mentioned it a little bit in some of the previous meetings, is that think about your protective clothing. And when you pick up your bees, I know the first time we picked up bees, there were bees flying everywhere. And we did bring our bee suit to make sure that just from a comfort perspective, that helped. And then the other thing is when you get your bees and you transport them, you know, we put them in the back of the truck and we have a tonneau cover so they're out of the wind, and we have them secured in a way that they can't tip over. If you put them in the back of your car, make sure that they're secured again, because if you got into an accident in that nuke, like what Julie showed you, tipped over, those bees would be all over inside your vehicle and you'd have a mess. And I know people don't ever think that they could ever get into an accident, but even if you braked hard, you could have just a total disaster. So you don't want to do that. So think about that. That's one thing we forgot to mention. All right, so with that, we're going to talk about, so this is what a package of bees comes in a box like this. There's a queen inside. There's the little queen cage. There is a can of sugar water inside, and there'll be a cover, and the cover will generally say live bees. And if you order them through the mail, the post office will call you and say, please come get them. So we had that. They don't like them there very long, and they come just like this in the mail. So this is what they come in, and that'll be full of your bees, and generally the bees will be clinging up towards the top. So the first thing that we're going to want to do, we've got our bees, we've got our box. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure you got your box and hive all ready before you get started. Take off your covers. And then, like Julie was, people were asking, but this is what the empty frames, and you all should already know that. But you take out, in our case, we're going to take out 5 frames. So take out 5 frames. Can you all kind of see the box?
Yep, it's looking good, Dave. You're good.
Okay. All right, so let me put these over here. All right. And then 2 on one side, 3 on the other. All right, so the next thing you do is you remove this top cover that's on the bees. So what I have along for tools when I start, before I get into the bees, is that we have a hive tool. I like to have a knife, and I'll show you what we use that for. I like to use a stapler or a stick pin, and I'll tell you what that's for. A spray bottle with 50-50 sugar water in it, and a paper clip. Can you see the paper clip? Those are what I use before I get started. So with that, the first thing I do is use the hive tool, and we pry off this top cover. So you pry that off, and then you set that to the side. All right, the next thing you do is you take your spray and you're going to spray your bees. Spray both sides. You can spray liberally. you're giving the bees something to do when you are going to be shaking them in. Okay, so you've sprayed your bees. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to shake. The bees are all up on the top. So we're going to shake it, and you go down hard, and then you stop. And what you're trying to do is get the bees that are on the top to all fall to the bottom. So with that, you just go like that, and all the bees will fall to the bottom. All right. So then you have to remove this syrup can. Getting this syrup can out is very difficult. I didn't save the old syrup can because we used the syrup. We used it for the bees, but I happened to find a can that fits in there, and it's about as hard to get out as the syrup can. So you're going to remove this syrup can. Then when you remove the syrup can, you can set that to the side. There shouldn't be any bees on it. And then what you need to do is, can you see that queen cage in there?
Yep, looking good, Dave.
Then what you want to do is use your hive tool and remove that queen cage. And then you've got your queen. And what we normally do is you set the queen to the side. You can put it in a shirt pocket. You're going to be putting her in a little bit, but all right. And then as soon as you remove the queen cage, you take your cover and you put the cover back. Just put the cover over the opening. All right. So as we do that, the next thing we're going to do is in your queen cage, there's two openings. One side is filled with a cork, and the other side usually has a cork, but it has some candy in it. And so on the side that has the candy in it, what I use generally is the knife, and I slowly remove this cork that's in here. You get that cork out, and then the candy will be there. And then the next thing we do is we take, I like using a paper clip, and you poke a little hole through the candy. Okay? So you poked a hole through the candy. And then the other thing is that you're supposed to install the bees in the hive with the candy side up. So to do that, which is kind of inconvenient, but they always put this strap so that the candy side is down. So what we've done is we undo the staple on the other side of this little strip that's here. You don't have to do it this way, but it's a whole lot easier for you, and I'll show you why. And then we staple that on the other side so that you will be able to have the candy side up. And we just put a little staple in the side there. And then what we do is we then take the queen cage and put the queen cage in the box. And what I like to do is just staple her to the top. If you do that, there you go. It's stapled to the top and it stays in place. The candy is up to the top. Well, it didn't, it just came loose. I'll staple it again. The way that it normally says to do it, if you read some of the books, is it says to just place her between two frames. Well, if you just place her between two frames, 90% of the time, there's nothing in these frames because it's just empty foundation. She just falls to the bottom. And then you just run into some issues. We've done it a few times and the queen slides to the bottom and then you just have a mess. And then what you do is it says to put her between two frames. So then you can take one of your frames and put it in there. So now you've still got a big opening. So I just want, what we're trying to do is that you can't let the queen go in with your bees right away because it takes a few days for the bees to get acquainted with the queen. So what the bees will do is they will eat that candy out. By the time they eat through the candy, they'll be acquainted with the queen and then they'll accept her.
Dave, I've got a question.
Yep.
Actually, a comment and a question. Evie did some checking and she said right now capital B is out of the 1 gallon feeders. So,
I'll be talking about some different options in a little bit.
Good. And then for the sugar water that's in the spray bottle, what's the recipe for that?
We do 50-50, so like 1 cup of water with 1 cup of sugar. And what you do is you heat up the water until it'll dissolve the sugar, but do not ever let the water boil. But you heat it up, and once it dissolves, so what we normally do is we take a 4-pound bag of sugar and make up like a 4-pound bag at a time. And it's just equal parts sugar and water. Heat it up, and then we have it that way. Okay, so let's see. Now the next thing we need to do is, so now what we're going to do is the bees should still be at the bottom. If they're not at the bottom and they move to the top, you can shake it again. If you feel like you want to spray them because they're a little agitated, you can spray them too. I have never smoked them when we have done a package before. I don't think there's really a need to do that. But if you feel more comfortable, you can. So then you remove this top cover, and then your bees are all in here, and then you tip this, you just take it over this opening, and you tip it over, and you just shake your bees out into this opening that's here. And you shake it. You can tap the sides a little bit if you want to. There's going to be some bees left over. We just set this alongside the hive like this, and they'll all work themselves in there because that's where the queen is. And then what we do is take our frames, because the bees are all in there, and we slowly put them in. The bees will make room. Slowly put them in one at a time. Very slowly.
And the bees will be flying around too. They won't all be right in the box. They'll be flying all around.
They'll be flying all around, yep. And then we usually take the outsides and kind of push it so that the frames are all in the middle like that. And our bees are then installed. And then what we do is feed the syrup. So in our case, we take that inside top cover and put it on. And then what we use, and Hanson Honey does have these. I called Jody a little bit for somebody else in the club, and they have these four jar feeders. We like these. They fit right on top. And then we have some quart jars. And then they also sell these lids with the little holes in them. You can make them. I think they cost not much. I don't even remember what it was. But we bought enough of these, and then you put this inside like that, and you put 4 jars in. Put as many jars in, because otherwise the bees will come up through the holes. So it's a 4-jar feeder, so we feed 4. It ends up to be a gallon on there. If you use, what's the smaller size jars, Carl?
Pint jars.
If you use the pint jars, you can put a medium to conceal it. We use the quart jars, so then we take a deep, and put a deep over top, which this is not a deep, but it'll work to show you. And then we put our cover over the top. And I think we're, yeah.
And we had a question. I answered it on the chat, but I'll ask the question and answer it as well. Why can't you let the water boil? And from what I've read is that you don't boil the water because it changes the properties of the sugar, and the way it changes it is not good for the bees.
Yep, that's what I've read as well.
Now there's another question. Someone recommended using a baggie feeder. Anyone use this successful? Seems kind of messy.
James does a wonderful job with that baggie feeder. I don't think, is he on?
I haven't seen James on.
I have seen people use baggie feeders as well. A lot of people do it. I don't know how to get it to work. I mean, I know you poke holes in it the same way you do with it.
Yeah, he just takes like a Ziploc bag and puts the syrup in there and seals it up and pokes holes in the top, and the bees come up on, I think you poke holes in the top. Maybe on the bottom.
I don't know.
Yes.
And the bag they put right on the frames as well.
And I guess you'd poke it on the bottom and flip it over, and it works the same way.
Yeah.
I haven't experienced that one yet. But that would, he likes it.
Just to add on feeders, I use the just regular jars, the cure jars, and I take and I put little pinholes in the jar. And I don't even buy the feeder, the 4 feeder. I just put this right over the hole.
Oh, there you go.
And I always leave room for the bees to kind of get up into the inner cover if they want to, but this works really well as well. And I used to you can put 2 of these on one hive.
So now we do have one more step is after about, I would say 3 to 4 days, we come back and go into the hive and check to make sure the queen is out. We've never had a time where we went back and the queen hasn't been out, but I think if she was out at that point, you could take the candy out and you could let her go. So you do have to go back after 3 to 4 days, and in that case, check, and then you can take that queen cage you can take out.
Got several questions regarding the 1-to-1 and not boiling. Does that apply to the spray bottle and feeding as well?
I would do it exactly the same. The stuff you're going to use for feed, we just pour into our spray bottle.
And Trevor says, just to confirm, once you have fed them for 1 to 3 weeks, you should replace it with a second super that has filled comb, right?
Well, most new beekeepers don't have a second super with filled comb, but you would take your, whatever you have, your foundation or your comb, and you would put it on. Like Julie said, when 7 to 8, I hate to give you time frames. I would rather do it more on, like Julie said, when 7 to 8 frames are filled out, that's time to add a box.
Yeah.
And they can fill a box up, and apparently if it's with comb, but they can fill a box. I've been hearing in 5 to 7 days they can fill a box if it's the nectar flow is going.
Right, and except for a medium. If it's a medium, and you would just install your bees into a medium, I'd wait about a week and then I'd put another medium right on top no matter what.
Yeah.
Because then it's a deep, the size of a deep. And then you can watch them build up. I don't know if you have built up comb for your second bee. I want them to fill out comb as soon as possible.
Yeah, I would tend to put it on a little sooner than maybe I should than too late.
Yeah, I would not have a problem with doing it right away either, actually. I'm more I think about it, more I think, because I've not actually been asked that question before, but if it was me, and I'm running deeps now, or mediums myself, if I was receiving, I probably would put it on, I mean, I wouldn't hurt to put it on right away, actually.
So it's not part of this class, but the other thing is if I did go in and see I had 7 to 8 frames filled out in the outside frames, so I would say frames in position 2 and position 8 or were filled with honey and built out comb, we would most likely swap that with frames 1 and 10, right? As long as there was no brood on it.
Yeah.
So that's part of managing your bees and being a manager is you want them to try to get them to fill out the outside frames, but bees will build up before they build out. So,
right.
So if you move your filled out frames with honey to the outside, then they'll generally build comb out on those ones on the inside because you want to make sure that's there because that's what they're going to use in the winter.
Right, and you also want them to build up because you need to have them build wax as quickly as possible so she can lay. She can lay up because she will lay up.
Got a question. Any luck with a tray feeder?
Tray meaning what, on the outside or in the inside?
They're on the inside. I've not used a tray feeder either. I have not used them. I think you have to be careful with these don't go up in there and drown. But I have heard people use straw or something to kind of. I shouldn't be talking. I'm not really familiar with them actually.
They have things in them now so that the bees apparently don't drown. You know what's interesting is somebody let us help them take care of one of their beehives that had died out from the year before. So we went in there and opened up the hive and wouldn't you know, there's a tray feeder in the hive where it was supposed to be filled with honey because the beekeeper forgot to take it out, and the bees couldn't fill those frames full of honey. So to me, it's you can't tell if they're empty, so you've got to open it up and look at them. But some people do use them. I would read about it, and if it's something that you have, take a look, but we haven't done it. I like to be able to, what I like to do is when I did this morning, because I put some more on our bees today, is I went in like this, I lifted the cover, it was 3/4 full of sugar water, and then I put the rock back on and I was done. Can't do that if you've got a feeder inside, or like a frame feeder.
We've got 4 or 5 questions. So is it possible to accidentally kill the bees with the spray? We got a package of dead bees that was extremely damp.
Not when, you mean when you spray them like this with the sugar water?
That's what I'm interpreting that to mean, yeah.
No.
Right. That they died of something else other than someone spraying them with sugar water would be my assessment of that.
Yeah, I would say if it's 40 degrees out, I don't think I would spray them very much. But the times I hadn't really thought about that, but if it's really cold, I might not want to spray them as much, right?
Yep.
I wouldn't, yeah, I'd be nervous about spraying if it's chilly, because you'll chill them.
Yeah, so if it's in the 60s, I think it would be okay.
So I got a question. If you make a large batch of sugar water, how long does it last? Does it ever get old? What's the shelf life?
My opinion on that is everybody tells you if it gets a little off color, then you probably shouldn't use it. I have had sugar water that we've kept in a cool place down in the basement and used. We've added more sugar to make 1-to-1, 2-to-1, and we've diluted 2-to-1 to make it 1-to-1. So I haven't had an issue.
Yeah, we've kept it over the winter. So what we use in the fall, we kept it all the way and then used it in the spring. So I'd say we got, at least Dave and I have the experience of 6 to 9 months with no problem.
I would say if you're in question, sugar's cheap. Don't use it.
Okay, point, counterpoint.
But you know, that's kind of the cool part of beekeeping is you get different opinions. We all have learned different things. So you take it all, you weigh it, and then you decide what you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sarah Mueller asked me to let everyone know when you ask a question, make sure it says you're asking it to everyone. She's getting a lot of questions to her privately.
Oh.
So look at that and make sure it's to everyone. Give me the answer in the chat if needed. We need to heat the water. See, but should we even heat the water mixture at all, or just 1 part water, 1 part sugar, no heating? So a question on making the sugar water.
My understanding is it wouldn't dissolve.
You just gotta make sure it's dissolved.
What's that, Julie?
You just gotta make sure it's dissolved.
Just make sure it's dissolved. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how you can tell it's dissolved is it turns clear.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's see.
And by the way, these are good questions because we've been doing this now for 4 years. So some of these questions are ones that we had during year 1. So they're all really good questions.
So Trevor added that he likes to add chamomile tea bags. The bees love it, but it's an extra step. So do you make chamomile, Trevor, do you make chamomile tea?
Yep,
And
so I just use the natural chamomile tea bags and I brew it, and then once the tea is brewed, I cool it down so the water isn't boiling or hot, and then add my sugar. And that way I figure if the bees use some of my sugar water that actually gets into my honey, it tastes nice. Like into my actual, but it's an extra step, so they may not care, but they seem to really suck it up because it has that flowery scent. Could just be me.
Okay. Thank you. That's a nice tip. We may have to try that this year. That is all of the questions that were on the chat.
Okay. Should I can open it up if anybody has other questions. Is there any that Sarah had that she wanted to read out?
She forwarded some of them to me.
Okay. All right. So everybody is unmuted now. So if there's other questions, feel free, you can ask.
Uh,
have
Got
a question.
Yep.
I have a question, but I don't know whom is in line.
You can ask, go ahead.
Sue Vickery, my question is, when you first get your nuke, is it better to spray them with sugar water to transfer them, or is it better to smoke them?
Are you talking about a nuke or a packet?
I was talking about a nuke, she said.
All right, for a nuke, you don't need to spray them. You know, I would open up my nuke, and you don't necessarily have to smoke them either. It depends on what's going on when you open up the top of the nuke box. So if you're feeling like they're rather agitated, you can.
My other question is,
You can ask, just push, I just muted you, so you push your space bar to talk. That way we can control it a little bit. But push
All
your
right.
space.
Are we ready?
Yep.
How much did we get? Anything of what I said?
more question.
For your nuke, you don't have to spray them. You would just give them, when you open up your nuke box and you feel like the bees are really agitated, you know, it depends on your trip to your house as well. If they seem agitated when you open them up, I would give them a couple of squirts of smoke. Keeps everybody kind of calm, keeps the alarm pheromone in the air down. Don't smoke the hell out of them. Just give a couple puffs of smoke to kind of calm things down a little bit. I wouldn't use spraying sugar water on. If you open up the nuke and everybody's pretty calm, and you don't have to spray at all. I'm not sorry. You don't have to smoke at all. It depends on how you feel when you open up the box and what's going on. It doesn't hurt to give a couple little puffs of smoke in the air. Don't do it directly down into your nuke, but just kind of give a couple of smoke puffs over the top.
Carl, why don't you ask some of the questions that were given on the chat? Oh, Carl, you're muted. I muted you all. There you go, Carl.
What is the best time to transfer a nuke? Early morning or later evening, or you can do
The best time to transfer your nuke is when the weather is suitable. So if it's warmer, I would wait until it's a little bit warmer in the day and transfer the nuke. It doesn't really have to be first thing in the morning or late in the evening. Just do it when the weather permits. And you want to do it, if the weather is pretty decent, do it right away. Just get your nuke transferred in. They're going to be happier outside the nuke. If you feel like the weather is bad, set your nuke, like I said, set your nuke on top and open them up and let them come out and wait a day. So it's weather dependent. In my view, it's weather dependent more than it is on what time of day. Your focus is try to get them in as soon as you can.
I got a question. Does the wind affect installing the bees?
Bees don't like cold, rainy, and they don't like the wind. So it just makes things a little harder. I don't know if I was just installing, if I would let it not be a reason to not do it. But I still, it's one of those situations like when Julie mentioned, if it was warm and sunny, I might look at the frames. If it was windy, I would transfer them quickly. And again, if it's 50 miles an hour, don't do that because you don't want that.
Another question. Do you install the bees from the nuke right when you get them home, or should you let them acclimate to the area from the nuke for a bit first?
You can install them right away, weather permitting. You don't need to set them on top and wait a while. Just get them in the box.
So a few years ago, we had somebody that bought a package of bees, and they picked them up in Wisconsin, and then they drove to pick up a family member from the airport in Chicago, and then they stopped at the restaurant to eat, and then they got home about 6 hours later, and they called up the beekeeper and said, "You gave me bad bees, they're all dead." So that would be a bad thing. So when you get your bees, keep them out of the sun, get them home, treat them like they're livestock. So there is some accountability and responsibility that you have to, if they're out in that 90-some degrees and it's a hot day, your bees could really be stressed and they could die. You just don't want that.
And then a question, did Julie say that she inverts the glass jar feeder and places it right over the hole in the inside cover? Can she
Yes.
demonstrate placement again, please?
And Julie has a bigger jar than the jar
Yeah,
we have.
I've got a, what is it, half gallon? I forget. So like the bucket, which I tip over, my inner cover, this isn't my normal inner cover. My normal inner cover has a hole here and a hole here. But even this will work just as well. What I do is I just, like the bucket, tip it over, let it drain for a while, place it over the top. I do the same thing with the glass jar. Now I've got sugar water in here and I've got holes in the top, so I'm not going to tip it over. But I would just tip it over, let it drain for a few minutes, tip it over. I don't tip it over the hive itself because I don't want to run sugar onto the bees. And then I just tip it over and I just place it over the hole. When I place it over the hole, so I'm tipping over, letting a suction, there'll be a vacuum created in here so that it'll stop running eventually. And I place it over the hole. When I place it over the hole, I don't place it directly over the hole. I leave a little space in case the bees want to come up through the hole and get into the inner cover and go back down again. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I would leave a little bit of space so bees can come out through here.
Another question, what is the maximum length in days you should wait for because of weather before you install a nuke?
If you don't feel you can install your nuke,
Like I said, you put it on top here and you open it up and you let them fly. You know, it's not going to take long, and this is going to get overcrowded. So you're going to have to, number one, check to see how crowded it is when you get it, because you don't really know how long they've been sitting in there to begin with. If this starts to get overcrowded, they're going to start creating a situation where they're going to want to swarm or they're going to abscond, they're going to leave. So, you know, open up your nuke and see what's going on in there. I wouldn't want to leave them in here more than a couple of days. I would want to get them into my box as soon as possible.
And I got a question that said there's a sliding cover on the bottom of the beehive. Should that be in the shut track or the open track to let air flow?
Oh, so they must have a screen bottom board that gives you the ability to.
Yep, I saw a nod of yes on that.
We've used screen bottom boards and we've used solid bottom boards. We've went a whole summer and left it with screens the whole summer. Right now, we're using all solid bottom boards. So I don't know if it matters, but if I bought a brand new package, depending on the weather, if it was 70 degrees, you could go either way. If it's colder than that, I would shut it. I don't know, but I don't know any rules. That's my thought.
That would be my answer too, Dave. Got another question. Anything we should do to prevent absconding from a new hive?
Prevent what?
Absconding.
What absconding normally means is there's a couple of things. There's some articles about that we've read, but it means the conditions inside the hive are so terrible, normally because of a disease or something, or there's an animal that is bugging it, but usually conditions are so terrible that they've decided to leave and leave all of the brood and the babies inside the hive because it's so bad they just have to go. So there are like you said, you can look at it and try to figure out if it's diseases. Some people have said if there's an animal that is harassing them a lot, that they've been known to abscond. Those are the main reasons that I have heard. But as far as what,
Take good care of your bees, you know?
yeah.
So Trevor says thanks, he's got to go, but he really appreciated all of the information.
Awesome. Well, we're hoping this works for you all. It's kind of a crazy time with all of this coronavirus stuff that we're all dealing with. But what, as a club, we wanted to do is make sure we're reaching out to you guys and addressing questions that you have. So if there's topics that you all are having a need to find out, send a note to info@browncountybeekeepers.com or reach out to anybody on the leadership team, and we will find more opportunities to do these. We've got our Coffee and Bees coming up on May 5th. We do that from 8 to 10 in the morning, and last month we had 11 people. So feel free to join us for that, and if it makes sense for us to do some more of these chats before our May meeting, we may consider that as well. I don't know.
We're getting a lot of thank yous from everyone that's been tuning in.
Julie, Carl, Sarah, Tom, anything else?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you all. We really appreciate it.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.